Thank you all for being here tonight. Dear SG, you have had a long history of friendship with this university. When you were at the head of the UN, you made sure that Sciences Po president was always invited to your regular conversations with the higher education leaders across the world. And when 5 years ago, Sciences Po asked me to establish PSIA, the Paris School of International Affairs, you were one of the very first speakers to come and share your rich experience with our students in what remains for them, to this day, a most memorable event. This evening, we owe it to the Association Française des Nations Unies and its president to have you in this auditorium for a new session of 90 minutes with Kofi Annan. For this honor, we are truly grateful to you, and of course, to Ambassador Bernard Millet, who has taken the initiative to lure you back to Paris. He was generous enough to think that a Sciences Po sequence with our students should be a necessary part of your visit, otherwise dedicated to supporting AFNU's mission of promoting the UN vision and tasks. What a life is yours, dear SG, from the day you were born some 77 years ago to this day. From that school in tropical Accra, where you were raised, to the freezing Minnesota campus where your clear penchant for the companionship of academics started. You then joined the UN in 1962 and moved through its ample labyrinth of institutions and left a durable mark at each of them. At the World Health Organization first, the High Commission for Refugees, the Human Resources Unit, the Budget and Planning Department, to the Department of Peacekeeping the very day it was created in 1992. You deftly navigated this complex organization full of great ideals and petty calculations, inflated egos and unknown soldiers, political schemes and bureaucratic hurdles before being entrusted with the top job in 1996. During that long, rich itinerary, I know, and the youth who came to hear you tonight need to know, that you had to face serious challenges, to take painful decisions, to remain steady in a sea of controversies, to try and reconcile great powers, assuage emerging newcomers, console failed ambitions. In the meantime, you also had to formulate the UN doctrine, keep clear its priorities, effective its impact, high its profile. That is what a moral authority is made of. And that is why you were bestowed with the Nobel Peace Prize and were nicknamed the world's secular pope. As far as I know, the one in the Vatican did not object. Honors of all kinds, including prizes, honoris causa doctorates, elegiac biographies, and permanent access to world leaders, have never eroded the most cardinal of your qualities, an infinite willingness to listen. Listen to fighting belligerents, listen to untamed tyrants, listen to imperious superpowers, listen to your colleagues' advice, listen to your envoys on the ground, listen to inquisitive reporters, and last but not least, listen to ordinary people, those in distress, in despair, in pain. If the arrogant warlord could present his case to you, his wretched victim had also your ear. If the powerful was intent on imposing himself upon you, the weak, the deprived, and the marginalized could also reach to you. I would add a formidable memory of people, important or modest, of dates, distant or recent, and of stands, grand or small. That memory helped you in gently reminding leaders of their past miscalculations, impetuous heads of state of their impatience, and warmongers of their misdeeds. With that contained smile of yours, in which can easily read, I at least tended to read, that power without wisdom is the best recipe for disaster. And then there is that combination of modest charm and moral gravity, as one of your closest observers has written. Both come naturally to you as if they were given at birth, not acquired throughout experience. Falling under your charm has been the fate of many. Experiencing your gravity has cooled the arrogance of a few. Deep in your mind, frequent in your discourse, is the central idea that the UN was originally established by the peoples, and its first mission is to serve them, all of them. It is impartial in their conflicts, but not neutral towards their choices. It is objective in its judgments, but not insensitive to their suffering. It is discreet in its knowledge, but vocal in reminding governments of their duties. One of my colleagues has called you a norm entrepreneur, one who believes that travel is hazardous without a compass, and world politics is dangerous without a few consensual principles. From revisiting sovereignty to democratizing multilateral decision-making, that normative mission you considered as an integral part of the UN and its Secretary General's role has attracted a lot of attention among our students, and I am certain many of their questions will revolve around these issues. Dear SG, those who sit in this large auditorium are getting ready to enter a world much less appealing than they had hoped. Following a two-decade decline in their numbers, conflicts are again on the rise, with hundreds of thousands of victims in Syria, in Libya, in Yemen, in Mali, in Centrafrique, and closer to us here in Ukraine, to name just a few of today's hotspots. Radical nationalism is presently competing with religious extremism and sectarian alignments to capture young minds. A slowdown in economic growth and rising unemployment in many parts of the world do not help either. Peace and security, the two goals given to the UN, are not as widely enjoyed across the planet as we had hoped they would be, or as they should be. Multilateralism is being defeated by unilateral adventures. The UN itself is absent from many areas, irrelevant in some others, unable to bring back peace in others. 25 years ago, there were true reasons for optimism. Today, many believe that a precious moment in modern history has been largely squandered. But we are not here today to distribute blame, nor to cry over spilled milk. Our impatient students want you to tell them a bit about the recent past and a lot about the disturbing present. However, if they are here in so large numbers today, it is because they are looking for rays of hope, for causes of optimism, for a roadmap to a better future, their future and the world's. And they perfectly know that with you, dear SG, with your chief elder's wisdom, your mastery of the issues, and your genuine leadership, they can hardly meet a more persuasive teacher. It's a session devoted to your questions. I'm going to ask the first question, but then you'll take over. So please start getting ready by coming close to the three mics you have. You have one here, you have one here, and you have one up there. Yes, I see it there. So you start queuing. You are going to take the questions by groups of three. Mr. Annan will try and answer some of them. Please be concise. Please tell us who you are, where you come from, and what kind of studies you are doing at Sciences Po. So I'm going to start by asking Mr. Annan the very first question, so you get ready. And my first question is the following. SG, In next June, the UN will be 70. You can. Now, yes. The UN will be 70 next June, and you have spent like 40 years of your life in that organization. How would you evaluate today's UN, and what kind of UN you are looking forward when the UN will be 80 or 90?
That's a difficult first question. But let me say that obviously we all agree that the UN is not a perfect organization. And yet, if it didn't exist, it would have had to be invented. At the end of the Cold War, there was lots of hope, lots of expectation that the UN would finally be able to do what it was set up to do. That great power divisions were over. We can get the great powers to agree to do what is right, to give us reasonable mandates and the requisite resources that were needed. And as we saw, peacekeeping operations grew very quickly. I see some of the peacekeepers from Benamie and others in the room, Alvaro de Soto, Akhtar Brahimi. It grew very quickly, and Benamie, who was head of peacekeeping operations. And we moved very quickly from about 500 peacekeepers to 75,000 in 16 operations. And it was exciting, it was exhilarating, there was hope. There was hope that the UN could do things. And I think we had a good run up till about 2002, after the just leading to the Iraq War. The Iraq War brought very serious divisions within the membership. It took a long time to heal, and I'm not sure I can say it has fully healed. It brought suspicions and mistrust, which is still with us. And in some senses, it's gotten a bit worse. Not only because of that, but some other subsequent developments. But the UN also at that time realized that they shouldn't just focus on conflicts, and that economic and social issues were extremely important, and that there could be economic basis for conflict. And we were able to get the member states to agree to embrace the Millennium Development Goals, for example, tackling absolute poverty across the world, improving the lives of children and mothers. We were able to get them to take on HIV/AIDS and set up the Global Fund, which has raised billions to help the poor. We were also able to get the UN was open to bring in others into the fold, civil society and the private sector, opening the doors to them. And I firmly believe, as you've said, that even though the UN is seen as an organization of states, the ideals and the principles it exists to protect and defend belongs to the people. The charter starts with "we the peoples," and we couldn't pretend that they didn't have a role to play in the organization. And as I keep telling my colleagues and the ambassadors, if we are here to serve the peoples are out there, not in the glass house in the building. We needed to go out, reach them, and also make it possible for them to reach us. It was also obvious that public sector alone, the governments cannot tackle all the issues we deserve. And we needed to bring in private sector and work with them in partnership and really open up and challenge them to work with us in resolving some of the issues. So we went through a period of really excitement and hope. That hope has dissipated somehow. The member states who cooperated immediately after the Cold War are now at loggerheads. They can't even agree on a painful, difficult, brutal issue like Syria. They can't agree on how to help the Syrian people. And yet we all know what is happening. And I think we need to bring back hope. We need to find a way of getting these governments to understand that they need to make a common cause. What is interesting is in the past, we had big powers who thought they had the right to lead and pull all of us along. Today, I don't see a big power that wants to lead. I don't see a big power that wants to show the way, which means that if we are going to tackle any of the big issues confronting us, we need a core group of countries who come together, make a common cause, which is rational, which is sensible, that the broader international community can support and get it done. And I hope we will move in that direction in our efforts to resolve the conflicts in the Middle East and in Africa and in Ukraine. I think I've said enough on that topic. And he keeps calling me SG. For those of you who don't know what that means, it means a scapegoat. We all need a scapegoat.
Well, I will start to the right, and you will come with smarter and easier questions. Three of you on the right. Concise.
So, my name is Delphine Zamba. I'm a student in public affairs coming from France. So, I've got a question. You are the author, Mr. the former Secretary General, you are the author of a famous report called "We the People, the Role of the UN in the 21st Century," also called the Millennium Goals Development, in which you mention values shared by the nation, which are the main purposes for the millennium coming, such as freedom, equity and solidarity, tolerance, nonviolence, respect of nature, and sharing responsibility. Now my question is, the Millennium Development Goals have been implemented on the 2015 agenda, sorry. Do the nations stick to the implementation schedule? Otherwise, which are the main impediments and international solutions that could be set up to alleviate or solve these inequalities? Thank you.
Thank you. And I know the one just behind you is going to ask the question. Go straight to the question. Go ahead, young man. There's no introduction.
Mr. Annan, thank you for coming. My name is Valentin Weber. I'm from Austria. I'm a dual degree student in international affairs at Sciences Po and the LSE. My question relates to the peace-building architecture, which was created in 2005 upon your urging. In 2015, it is celebrating 10 years of its existence, and a review panel is supposed to publish a report. What is your personal opinion or assessment of the peace-building architecture so far, of its achievements, and where do you see possible improvements? Thank you.
Thank you. Third one.
Good evening, and thank you once again on behalf of all of us for your visit this evening. My question steps aside from the UN and asks of you something else. You're sitting here today.
Closer to the mic.
You're sitting here today in the capacity as well, I suppose, as the founder and chair of the Kofi Annan Foundation, and you recently wrote, "My generation, of course, has to ask itself how we can best support the young in their ambitions, for it is the least that we can do." I'm interested to know what lies in store for the Kofi Annan Foundation in 2015, and in particular for what you've written about for young people. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, I think the target that was set for the Millennium Development Goals have had quite a bit of impact. The Millennium Development Goals has helped lift millions out of poverty, mainly in India, China, Brazil did well. Quite a lot of the other countries have implemented parts of the Millennium Development Goals, but have not fulfilled all the goals. But we can say that today there are more girls in school, mothers are healthier, children under 5 are living, are not dying, and clean drinking water is available to many more people than we had hoped. And in terms of absolute poverty, we have reduced it by 50%. That is no mean achievement, but we have not achieved it all. And the question is why we have not been able to do it. Each country approached it. In Brazil, for example, by reducing inflation drastically, one was able to raise the level of standards for millions of people. In China, the rapid economic growth helped improve their conditions. In other poorer and smaller countries, they couldn't have that sort of broad impact, but they were able to help their people in areas of health, education, clean water, and such. And so I would say that the Millennium Development Goals have been important. For the first time ever that I can remember, we all agreed to a common framework for development, a framework that was accepted by all governments, civil society, and understood by the ordinary person in the street in Delhi, Accra, or Johannesburg. It didn't take a thesis to explain to the mother that the daughter has to go to school, that clean water was important, or to get companies to understand that they don't have to pollute the lake that is producing drinking water for the village. So not all has been achieved, but we have gained a lot. And now, of course, the Secretary General is looking at what they call the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, to follow the Millennium Development Goals when they end in December this year. My own feeling is that the MDGs are the absolute floor that we should help ensure that each citizen receives. And so even if we have not completed or achieved it by 2015, December 2015, we should continue our effort. On the question of Peace Building Commission, one of the people in this room played a very important role in that. That's Lakhdar Brahimi. The Peace Building Commission, some would argue, has not performed the way one expected it to perform. And I think there are several reasons. First of all, you have the question of resources and the question of a mandate given to the UN personnel in a certain country after the conflict. And I think we also have to be honest with ourselves. There is a tendency in the international community to believe that when the killing and the shooting stops, the crisis is over. And sometimes the money and the resources needed for nation building and peace building doesn't follow easily. And in fact, what is even worse is in desperate humanitarian situations, we come together for pledging conferences, we pledge billions, but we don't pay. We get the media, the press say government has promised this and that and that. And to read that, we promised 4 billion plus for a program in Syria, but only 19% has been paid in. What sort of solidarity or international community is that? How do we change that attitude? As Secretary General, the only situation I remember where we got more money than we needed and was the tsunami in Indonesia. And I asked my staff to analyze how come people were so generous, how come we were able to raise so much. I then came to the conclusion that first of all, the tsunami happened on the 26th of December, almost on Christmas Day. A period of the year, a period of giving, a period of generosity, a period of solidarity. And on top of that, it was really an international tragedy. The people who were hit came from about 50 different countries. A Swedish mother may be looking for a 4-year-old child, or a French woman may be looking for a daughter. And in some situations, the collection from the public exceeded what their governments gave us for the crisis. But we have not been able to replicate that since the tsunami, and we cannot organize that each crisis happens on Christmas Day for us to get that kind of response. On the Kofi Annan Foundation, where we are trying to help improve the lives of people, we do a lot on governance, on reconciliation, on mediation. I just came from Colombia and Havana, where I was trying to see what I can do to help the negotiations between the Colombian government and FARC. But I think when it comes to our relations with the young people, we do want to engage. We engage them seriously. We take you as the leaders of the 21st century. And I believe intergenerational dialogue is extremely important. My generation has not always succeeded. We've not always done what we should, and I'm not sure we are leaving you a very healthy world, particularly in terms of environment and others, but you're going to take charge. It's your world now, and we need to really engage you and try to encourage you to take responsibility. You don't have to be old to be responsible. You don't have to be old to lead. You yourself should know within you individually when you must lead, when something moves you to act, when something moves you to organize your friends, to take responsibility, to take leadership. And don't hold yourselves back. Sometimes we, the old, will tell you, shut up and listen, you are too young. I think we are doing less and less of that. But you shouldn't always be cowed by that. And so, keep hope and be courageous and ask questions and take action when you think you are right. Thank you.
Three on the left side.
Your Excellency, thank you so much for being here. My name is Alessandra. I'm a first year student in Masters at PSIA, and I'm also the president of the Model UN Society of Sciences Po. So I have a question regarding this weekend's gathering of the heads of the Arab League that have gathered in Sharm el-Sheikh and agreed to create a joint Arab-Sunni anti-Tehran military force. How do you feel about this historical development, and what are implications in your view? Thank you.
The question was, we couldn't hear it.
Get closer to the mic.
Apologies. So this weekend, the heads of the Arab League states have gathered together in Sharm el-Sheikh and created this joint force of Sunni joint force anti-Tehran. And my question is, what are the implications of this historical development, and how do you feel about this? Thank you.
Good evening, Your Excellency, and thank you for being here. My name is Leah Batal. I'm in Master in International Economic Development, International Economic Policy, sorry. And I'm also part of the United Nations Club of Sciences Po. And so I was wondering, concerning the recent victory of Benjamin Netanyahu, how should we interpret it on the international level? Isn't it a reaffirmation of the position of the Israeli population regarding the international law that has not quite been entirely respected until now? So how should we interpret it on the international level? Thank you very much.
Young man.
Good evening, sir, and welcome to Sciences Po. I'm Nelson Kemen, a student in public administration, born the same year as Nelson Mandela was released from prison. My dad has a question for you. We both are from Cameroon, and he wants to know, how does Boko Haram get their weapons, and who are their suppliers? Well, thanks.
Let me start with a question on the Arab League. This is an issue which has been on the table for quite some time. They've discussed it in the past. But now, given the situation in the region, they seem to have come to an agreement on establishing a force. I think the question is not so much whether they are able to establish the force or not, but how you use the force, what are the ground rules, and how they are deployed. When Yemen exploded, we read about the Saudi Arabians' air action with a coalition, and there was a sense that nobody was going to put in ground troops. I'm not sure if by creation this force now, there is some expectation that ground forces could go in there. And if the ground forces do go in, what will be the rules of engagement? And we must also remember that as former head of UN Peacekeeping and Secretary General, and there are many people here who know the issue, we had tended often to be very careful not to allow neighbors to participate in peacekeeping operations. They often have their own history, they come with their own issues, and if you are not careful, it complicates the situation. I recall I was in Kenya in 2008 helping them resolve their conflict when the question of deploying Kenyan troops to Somalia came up. And I recall a conversation I had with several of the ministers. I said, be careful. If you're going to deploy troops to Somalia, who are your neighbors, and you also have your own Kenyan Somali population. So you have Kenyan Somalis and Somali. If the population gets pumped up against Somalis and they begin attacking them, which Somalis are you attacking? The local Somalis or the other? And you can create divisions amongst your own society. And to some extent, that has happened. And so when you have a sort of a force of that nature, the rules of engagement and deployment becomes important. Would you deploy immediate neighbors? Or would you go further afield to bring the troops? And so there are lots of questions there, and I really believe it's too early for me to comment on what would happen and what impact the forces would have. On the question of Prime Minister Netanyahu, is an interesting question you pose. Obviously, during the campaign, he indicated that he wasn't interested in two-state solution. And that clarity is perhaps helpful. He's pulled back since the election, but I think he did make that statement and it's out there. And this is something that not only him, but the Israeli population would need to think through very carefully. They have two choices. Either you accept the two-state solution or insist that you're not going to have the two states and you have one state. You can have, they are also talking of a democratic Jewish state. You can have a smaller democratic state, or you can insist on a larger state that embraces Arab population that will constantly fight for its rights and have tensions in society. In fact, interestingly enough, one of my conversations Gaddafi, a former Libyan leader, Gaddafi had with me, he said, I have a solution for Israel. I think you guys should forget the two-state solution and have one state, call it Israel-teen, and have them all live together. And in 20, 25 years' time, we'll see who has a majority, what's his attitude. And this is really an issue the Israelis have to think about. But you also raise a question of international law. And here I think we are dealing with the question of occupation and what the international community should do. And I think this would also come to the fore if indeed the position is we do not want a two-state solution, we are not going to negotiate. That becomes a real urgent issue. On the question of Boko Haram, I think it's fascinating to see the countries in the region finally coming together to fight Boko Haram, although there are reports that South African mercenaries are also involved. The group that fought in Sierra Leone, the executive's outcome, they were much younger than dynamic, agile. I'm told now they're about 50, 60-year-old mercenaries, but apparently they are still equally effective. But in any event, the Nigerian government seems in the last 6 weeks or so to have taken the fight to Boko Haram with the support of Chad, Cameroon, and Niger. And I hope that effort will continue. And what is unfortunate is that we waited so long to take on Boko Haram and allow them room to do the damage that they have done. Thanks.
One floor up.
Okay. Good evening. Thank you for being here tonight at Sciences Po, first of all. My name is Christina Venard. I'm studying public administration at Sciences Po. I'm a French student, and my question is also related to Yemen. Sorry, I hope it's going to be different. My question is, I would like to know your opinion as regard to the UN position, the UN position in Yemen and the current situation in Yemen. And I would also want to know what is your opinion as regards to the implication from a religious perspective in the whole Middle East. Thank you.
Young man.
Good evening. I'm Alex, I'm a French student, and my question is whether you still think it is possible to have a meaningful reform of the UN Charter, and if yes, what do you think is the likeliest path to that reform, and what are the obstacles? Thank you.
Mademoiselle.
Good evening, my name is Yu Ting. I'm an exchange student from Canada studying economics. We have one of the largest freshwater supplies in the world in Canada. And I was wondering, as global demand and the population for water increases, how do you see the international dynamic changing between the haves and the have-nots of fresh water? Thank you.
I think the situation in Yemen is becoming more and more complex. Obviously, we've talked about the military action and whether ground troops would also be sent in. Attempts have been made to mediate that, and I think Ben Omar has been doing, quite a good job. But it's a very tough and a difficult situation. And what has been under the table is now firmly put on the table, where at the conference in Sharm el-Sheikh, the question of role of Iran and role of Saudi Arabia came up. Obviously, in Sharm el-Sheikh, they focused on the role of Iran, not so much on the other side. And this is an issue that covers the whole region from Syria to Iraq to Yemen. And it goes back to the comments I made earlier, that if we are going to try and resolve this conflict in the region, we need to have a core group of countries that make a common cause. And this should embrace the regional powers as well as the international community to try and understand that there is a common danger facing all of us, and we need to work together to deal with it. I mean, today, Syria and Iraq is one military theater. Not only is ISIS operating on both sides of the border, the coalition is doing the same, and it could spread. You talked of the role of religion. I think on this one, I have a very firm view that religion is often exploited by ambitious politicians and leaders for their own benefits. I firmly believe that the issue is not the faith, but the faithful and the way some of them behave. Every major religion can be seen as almost education and social morality. don't kill, be fair to your neighbor, be merciful. And we are all taught these things. How can you go and kill in the name of such a religion and say that you are promoting the religion? Often it is ambitious men who are exploiting religion for power. What worries me is that these extremists are in almost every case, a small minority. They hijack a particular religion, do terrible things in the name of the religion, but the majority don't speak up. We sit back and create the impression that indeed they're acting for us, instead of reacting and getting them know that you don't speak in my name. Let me now turn to the question of the fresh water. Obviously, this is a major problem with the climate change coming up, and we have many dry lands around the world, even Brazil today, which is going through a very serious drought, where water becomes a real problem. And now, of course, we are shifting, transporting bottles of water, clean water, all around the world, and throwing away these plastic bags, plastic cans, which pollute our seas and other parts. It's a real challenge how we make sure everybody gets clean water. And this is why when some people look at Norway, for example, they are very jealous. Norway today is exporting oil. In the future, probably water will be its main export. There's lots of water, and we do need clean water. We need to educate our people on how to preserve water. We need to have technology that helps us purify water, because it can become a real challenge when we talk of climate refugees. It could be on account of water, and that could also create lots of tensions. If you have a neighboring country that runs out of water and the population decides to move to go to the other country to get water, and they are stopped at the border, what are the rules? They will tell you are not refugees. You are not running away from war. How do we treat them? How do we handle these environmental refugees? Who takes care of them? Who provides resources for them? Because it's a problem we already see. On the same side of the border, you could have one group which have crossed the border and they are refugees and get international assistance. And you have people on the other side who are needy, but they have not crossed the border, are therefore not refugees. They are internally displaced. For a long time, they got no assistance. And they couldn't understand it. They say a hungry person is a hungry person. Why do I have to cross the border to be hungry, to be acknowledged as hungry, and be given support? It's better now. Now we have programs also for internally displaced people, but we are going to have to confront the environmental refugees, and we have no rules or guidance on how to deal with them. Thank you.
Any questions on the right?
Good evening, sir. My name is Isha. I'm a student in public management from Pondicherry, India. And I had a question about the Human Rights Council, which you set up during your tenure. And I was wondering, in your opinion, do you think the Human Rights Council has been successful in protecting and enforcing women's rights specifically? What could it be doing to better enforce and protect women's rights? Especially given that one of the main criticisms of international legal instruments is that they're crafted in a way that ignores women's lives. And lastly, follow-up question, what prospects do you think there are for increased female leadership in the UN family, or the labyrinth, as our dean calls it? What prospects do you think there are for increased female leadership in the UN family or the UN labyrinth? Thank you.
2 for the price of 1.
Hi, my name is Maria. I'm from Costa Rica, and I'm a master's student in international security. My question concerns UN peacekeeping. So, as you know, a high-level panel on peace operations will report this summer on potential reforms. There seems to be a clear division between those countries that contribute troops and police and countries that contribute money. So it has been said before that some countries pay the bill and other countries pay the price of blood. So how do you think this imbalance can be corrected? How can we bring more countries from the rich north to contribute troops and police? And more generally, what do you think are the most important reforms that are needed for UN peacekeeping today? Thank you.
Good evening, sir. My name is Tawanda Tindwa. I'm a first-year student in the Programme Europe Afrique. As you know, there was a UN report that was released in 2013 that shed light upon the cocaine trade in West Africa, an industry that's now worth $1.25 billion and is also a threat to the institutions and the economic progress of the region. So my question is, how should the war on drugs strategy be orientated by the West African states and their respective institutions in a manner that is that does not compromise the legitimacy and the integrity of these institutions?
Yeah, I believe the Human Rights Council has made a difference, and I think the Council is working better than the Human Rights Commission did. One of the main reasons why it's working better is that each country's human rights record is reviewed. Before the Commission, the Council was set up, we had a situation in the Human Rights Commission where each year, for about 6-8 weeks, countries gathered in Geneva, and you had two groups confronting each other. One group came determined to condemn the other, and the other came determined to defend itself and also point finger at the others. We have to accept that no country in the world can claim to have a perfect human rights record. We can all improve our records, and we can all learn. When we set up the Human Rights Council, and you have 47 members on the council, and we raise a question of universal review of records of each of the countries, I push the idea that we should start with the review of the 47 members on the council, and that they can learn from each other. And when you know that today is my turn and tomorrow it will be yours, you are much more responsible in the comments and the criticism that you make, because it will be played back to you and your words will be used to hang you tomorrow. So the discussions become a bit more responsible. And the rapporteurs are also doing a good job traveling around the country, and some work very quietly. Others, given the nature of the issues they are looking at, sometimes become very vocal and very transparent. But I think the council is working better. I met with them. They invited me to have lunch with them about 4 weeks ago. And I was very pleased with the way the members felt that the council is working. And of course, you raised the question of what it does for women, and women's issues and their rights are part of the discussions that they have. But what is important is to encourage governments to pass the right laws at the national level. And you are right, the UN itself must show an example. And I hope when the next Secretary General takes office, she will not only make the point, she will not. That women's rights ought to be respected and acknowledged, but that is not issue for women alone, that the men have to work with the women to make it happen. On the question of, sorry, let me get my glasses out. On the question of police and military contribution to peacekeeping operations, there are several problems. You are right that most of the troops and police come from the third world. They come from the third world for several reasons. First of all, some of the third world countries feel their troops will get experience. Some believe they may get some money out of it, but it's really not a money issue because I don't know if the rates had been increased. The government got $1,000 per soldier per month. And so it may be able to pay the cost of some of the third world soldiers, but $1,000 per month will not reimburse the use of a French soldier, an American soldier. In fact, when we needed services, sometimes when we looked around and tried to rent it or borrow it from governments, the US Defense Department was way out. The costs were so high that there was no way you could hire any of them unless they gave it to you for free. And so for them, $1,000 didn't cover their cost. And also there's a tendency that we will not put our troops on the UN command, which is also a problem. And I've seen situations where a force commander has given an order that we do certain, and one battalion doesn't move because his headquarters has instructed the commander not to move, which is an extremely dangerous situation. You can get people killed. And what we have to understand is in these peacekeeping operations, the UN and the force commander doesn't have command over the troops. They have operational command, but not full command over the troops that they are working with. And it becomes quite tricky. And so the rich and the powerful choose and pick which operations they will go in, which has direct national interest, and sometimes they do it alone without the UN. These are some of the challenges that the UN faces. One can increase the reimbursement for the governments, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the rich and powerful would go in automatically. You know, we live in a world where the rich feel very comfortable absorbing themselves from rules and laws they apply to the poor and the weak. On the question of UN reform, I think the Council needs reform. The Council structure today reflects the geopolitical realities of 1945. As Secretary General, I tried very hard to push for Security Council reform. In fact, I offered two options. Either we increase the number of permanent members by 6, creating 2 more seats for Africa. It's a permanent seat for Latin America, 2 seats for Asia, and at one point, others thought that there should be 1 for Germany, which is a tough sell, because when you consider that of the 5 permanent seats, Europe has already got 3. It's got 3 in a region which is losing population in terms of demographics, and the region that is growing very fast, pushing for a place at the table. And I think the Council either has to be reformed for us to get cooperation from the new emerging states, from Brazil, South Africa, Indonesia, and others, or we're going to see very serious competition. If we don't reform the Council, instead of cooperation, we are going to get destructive competition. We are already seeing it at the financial level, where there has been refusal to reform the bank, World Bank, and IMF. And today, China is setting up a new bank, Asian Infrastructure Bank, with $100 billion fund. And I think the money can grow. Luckily for us, it has invited Europe to join. France, UK, Germany, and others are joining the fund. US is still outside it. I noticed the US Secretary of the Treasury is going to China today. Whether there will be a new decision once they talk, I do not know. But if the financial institutions had been reformed, I doubt very much that we will see this new bank that is coming into being. And if the council does not reform, but expects its decisions to be accepted and respected by these emerging powers, I think they have something else coming. If they are not careful, the primacy of the council will be questioned and challenged, particularly if the emerging powers are not at the table. On the question of drugs, it is a real problem. As you know, my foundation set up a West African Drug Commission with members from around the coast, from the West African countries, chaired by former President Obasanjo, to look into this issue. We were looking at it from several angles. First of all, I believe personally that the war on drugs has failed. I think the war on drugs has destroyed many lives, but wrong-headed governmental policies have destroyed many more. I mean, you go to some of the states in the US, the state spends more money on prisons than on education. Young people are thrown into jail for possession, and they come out of jail destroyed. What we need is to take a health and educational approach. Try and treat them, try and educate them, and wean them off, but be very hard on the drug barons, who are not only corrupting our young, but are also making lots of money which they use to distort politics, bribe politicians, bribe customs officials, bribe judiciary. And so it undermines democracy and it undermines governance. When you see what's happening in the Sahel, which is also another route where the drugs travel to Europe, there's lots of money being floated around. And this should not be an issue for West Africa alone. The destination and the targeted markets are Europe and the US. And we should all work together to contain this trade and deprive the drug laws of their opportunities. Africa has really become a real center as these war laws lose their traditional transit positions, whether in the Caribbean and elsewhere. The Latin American cocaine is coming through West Africa, and the Asian heroin is coming through East Africa, all headed towards Europe. So we need to find a way of working together. We've been encouraged to try and see if we can do another commission for East Africa. We haven't taken a decision yet, but it is a real problem, and it offers criminal elements opportunity to make lots of money and continue their uncivil activities.
Thank you. As you are making you really work hard. But look at the queues that have formed. I'm not going to impose upon you everybody and everyone, but...
Good evening, sir. Thank you again for coming, just like everyone else said, obviously. So my name is Ariane Forg. I'm an LSE Sciences Po dual degree student in European Affairs. And my question is in a way related to the evolution of the Security Council with the debate on the EU seat. Do you think about the regionalization that it is the way that countries are going to work together against, for instance, transnational threats with the development of, for instance, the African Union or other Asian American unions? Or is national sovereignty going to become a new part of international relations again, including regarding the evolution of European politics with the rise of far-right populism? Thank you.
Good evening, Your Excellency. My name is Lindsay Ricker, and I'm a human rights and humanitarian action student from the United States, and it's a great privilege to speak to you tonight. You're a man of many accolades, and what I admire you most for is your apology to the Rwandan society for failure to act after the genocide. Since this moment, Mukesh Kapela has written a book called Against the Tide of Evil, where he details his tenure as humanitarian coordinator in the UN in Sudan during the Darfur Crimes Against Humanity. In the book, he details sending multiple reports daily to the UN detailing the crimes against humanity, to which he received no reply from the UN. Could you respond to why you think the UN did not respond to Dr. Capella's reports, and what do you think needs to be done to prevent further crimes against humanity? Thank you very much.
Good evening, sir. My name is Sebastián. I'm a master's student in international security, and I come from El Salvador. And perhaps this explains why I'm interested in asking the question, a very concrete question I wanted to ask you that has been asked multiple times before, but it's still a very crucial issue in many parts of the world. How much justice can we afford to sacrifice in search for peace? And maybe if I might just add to that, what is your personal take on this justice versus peace dilemma? Does this dilemma even exist? Thank you.
That's an easy one.
On the question of regionalization, on the question of regionalization, the UN Charter itself and the UN itself recognizes the role of regional organizations. And there are some problems, in my judgment, which are best left to them. And as I said earlier, some issues are too close, and they may bounce it to the Security Council rather than deal with it at the regional level. So regional organizations are important. They have a role to play. If you take Europe, where we are today, I consider the European project, the European Union, a very important development. And, you know, we talk of about 70 years. And 70 years in terms of history is relatively short. But today, I personally think war in Europe is unthinkable. Yes, you might remind me about what's going on in Ukraine, but that's not the same as the kind of war that we had 70 years ago. And I think other regional organizations are also bringing these governments and peoples together, whether in Asia or Africa or Latin America. The regional organizations differ from one to the other. The African organization or the ECOWAS, the West African thing, have no hesitation getting involved in neighbors' issues and commenting on it, and in some cases even sending troops. ASEAN doesn't like to get involved in neighbors' issues. Is there a problem? You wouldn't, until recently, get them even to talk about what's going on in Myanmar or what's going on in Thailand. Is a responsibility for the country. But I think it's important for the UN also to work with these regional organizations, and we do. And I think when I was Secretary General, I met with them twice a year, where the heads of the regional organizations came and we discussed common issues. And I think it is very important. There's also the question of the human rights and the fact that you do not believe that a report on Rwanda was not responded to by the UN. Unfortunately, the UN is structured in such a way, and there are lots of reports, lots of comments on what UN does, and it is not always possible for the UN to comment or respond, and particularly on an issue where the UN has issued its own comprehensive and frank report to explaining what happened and what went wrong. If the UN went around commenting on all the reports that are written about it, I think the staff will have very little time for some of the other things they do. But on important issues, we shouldn't keep quiet. We should be heard. We should speak out. And I think we did on the issue of Rwanda. On the question of peace and justice, it's a question that one gets often. Can you have peace without justice? Which comes first? And I've been in situations where the leaders have told me, when hundreds have been killed, said, Mr. Secretary General, we know our society. We've had this problem before. We have a way of dealing with it. We talk a bit about it, and we move on. I said, but that's why you come back to it. You move on, allow impunity, you don't deal with it, and it gets repeated. You have to make people accountable. You have to try and end impunity. When I travel around the world or get into conflict situations, the victims and everybody wants justice. They want accountability. Some want compensation. Obviously, it's a tough call. The first thing you want to do is to stop the killing. But if you stop the killing and leave it there without making those who've committed atrocious crimes responsible, you are likely to repeat it in the future. So the challenge is to find that narrow middle where you get peace, but also hold people accountable. Often you're told, how can you expect leaders, whether governmental leaders or guerrilla leaders, to negotiate in good faith when the path you're offering them is a path to jail? And here, the question of timing is extremely important. Some of the crimes we are talking about have no statutes of limitations. So if you don't pick them up and deal with them today, you can deal with them at another time. Some of us here were involved in Yugoslavia. At Dayton, President Milosevic played a key role. Mladic was there. Karadzic was there. Peace was achieved. But all three ended up before the Yugoslav tribunal. And this is where the question of timing, if the prosecutor uses it well, offers quite a lot of room. But I don't think anyone, or I'll be ready to argue that for the sake of peace, there should be no accountability. You will repeat it in the future.
A question from the first floor.
Good evening, sir. I'm a second-year student, a French second-year student. And my question is, which advice would you give to students who want to have a career into
Closer to the mic, we can't hear.
So good evening, I'm a second-year student, and my question is, which advice would you give to students who want to have a career into international organizations or into diplomacy?
Good evening, sir. My name is Bhavani. I'm a second-year student in international security, and I'm from Brazil. My question is on the BRICS. The BRICS, they didn't adopt a very aggressive or position on the Ukraine crisis. They were rather passive, and they didn't have a key role in finding a peaceful solution. On the other hand, they are engaged in creating the new development bank, so they seem to be choosing in which issues they want to act in the global scenario. So when you see those contrasting positions in global problems, do you think that global governance can be led in the future by non-Western and emerging countries, or they won't have a constructive role in the international system unless they have a more strong position?
Young man.
Good evening, sir. My question this evening is not addressing to the former Secretary General of the UN or the founder of the Kofi Annan Foundation. Instead, I'm addressing to Kofi Annan as an African citizen and leader. Professor Salamé before spoke about a disturbing present, difficult to understand, where we need a roadmap for the future. For this reason, I'm asking to you, how do you foresee the future of the African continent? Can you share with us the seeds of hope that make you be hopeful on the African future? Thank you.
Well, to make a career in the international system, you haven't told me which organization you are thinking of. No, to make a career in the international system, I think you should take the studies you are getting here very seriously. I think it's a good preparation for your future career. It was an interesting period when I entered the international system. I was your age. I think I was 23, 24 when I entered in Geneva with the World Health Organization. And at that time, I thought I was going to stay with them for 2-3 years and move on. It took me about 40 years or more before I could move on. But I think you should look for an international career in the sense that today we live in an interdependent world. Your generation is fortunate to be able, as we see in this room, work with different cultures, different nationalities, learn about the world, and you live in a world where, by and large, we accept interdependency, and most governments realize today they have to give up a bit of their sovereignty to make things work and to cooperate with others. Obviously, diplomacy and international relations is not an issue for governments alone. In addition to the international organizations that one can work for, I believe that international relations today also embraces the people-to-people contacts, which is constantly going on, either on individual level, corporate level, and sometimes it's quite amazing the influence some individuals have who are not in government or in international organization. So keep up your interest beyond your own borders, beyond your own country, and develop your skills. And you could end up either in an international organization or with some organization that is working across borders and give you the satisfaction and the challenge that you're working for. On the question of governance and the role of third world countries, whether you have to be strong to lead or to play an important role, what is clear is that you don't have to be strong necessarily to play an important role. Bigness or strength has nothing to do with greatness. You have small countries that have played a very important role. But in terms of realpolitik, weight, economic weight, size of countries play a role. The way one will react to China of today is quite different to the way they will react to Ghana if Ghana were to raise its voice. It is quite different today than the way we would have reacted to China 20 years ago, before it became the power that it is today. And so size and power is important, but it is not everything. And you have some smaller countries making an important contribution and punching above its weight. So you have all sorts that make things turn around in our world. On Africa, you've asked me to speak to you today, not as a Secretary General, without any pretension of rank or position or age, but just as an African. I think I have lots of hope for Africa. Africa, as I often say, is not a poor continent. It's a rich continent with lots of poor people. And that's a paradox that ought to be possible to resolve if we were to organize ourselves properly and manage our affairs in an effective manner. What I would want to see is an Africa that resolves the conflicts that has inflicted our continent and focus on the essential task of economic and social development. Focus on preparing our youth for tomorrow, giving them good education, looking after their health, an Africa that uses the resources it gets from its natural, the revenues it gets from its natural resources to look after the welfare of its people. Yes, there are many trouble spots around Africa, but there are also some bright ones. And I really believe in the young people of Africa who are dynamic, who are demanding change, who are demanding a say in how they are governed and by whom, and the emergence of a dynamic civil society. I think I have hope in Africa, and sometimes I wish I was young again to help and to play a role in the revolution that I see coming to my continent. And so keep faith in Africa, keep hope, and in the long run, Africa will surprise you. Thank you.
There are hardly 5 minutes left. So I'm going to take one question from each of the queues. I'm sorry for the others. I know I've made myself too many enemies tonight. So one question from this.
Right. So good evening, sir. Thank you very much for coming here tonight. I have one short question. I just would like to have your opinion about multilateralism. For you, is it useful? Is it utopic? I don't know, just your opinion. Thank you very much.
Thank you. One question here.
Hi, my name's Tina. I'm an Iranian Canadian studying international security. I feel like I won the lottery getting to ask my last question. With the Iranian nuclear talks currently happening and the deadline approaching very quickly, do you believe the agreement will be ever reached? What will it look like? And what will it really change in the region? Thank you so much.
Last but not least.
Good evening, my name is Charles. I'm studying public affairs. I was just wondering, what do you think of the call of certain UN state members to restrain the use of permanent members of the Security Council's veto in case of mass atrocities? Thank you very much.
There is someone who's not a student, but a diplomat, but he has a baby face. So he's allowed to give one question.
I don't know if it's a privilege. Good to see you again. How are you, Secretary General? My question was just about your experience. You have been Secretary General DPKO, your experience with France and the UN when you were Secretary General and when you were at the head of the DPKO. Thank you.
I think whether we like it or not, multilateralism is here to stay, or some people call it globalization. The world is so interdependent now that we cannot get away from it. We need to think, we cannot think in purely local terms. Yes, local issues are important, but we have to understand, and even the powerful have to understand that what they do has impact on other countries and people far away from their own countries, and they have to bear that in mind. And multilateralism is here to stay, to the extent that sometimes people believe that when it comes to the powerful countries who take important decisions which have impact of those of us who are not around the table, they should try to the extent possible to bear the broader interest in mind and not take the decisions and which impact us sometimes negatively and treat it as if it's collateral damage. But we need to think in broader global terms. We can no longer afford, as I said, to think in purely local terms. On the nuclear talks, I'm quite hopeful that there will be an agreement. I know that there are fundamentalists on both sides, on the Iranian side, on the American side, and in Israel, who would want to see this fail. I think it would be unfortunate if it fails. I believe an agreement will be positive and positive for the world. And these 6+1 talks have gone on long enough, and I hope with all the efforts that have been made, they will be creative and enough to come up with a solution that will be acceptable. Some people are making predictions and talking about what's in the agreement and how bad it is and all that. With these negotiations, it's never done until it's done. And I would urge people to be patient until the agreement is done before they begin to comment and offer judgments. The attempts that are being made to derail the talks must be rejected by the world. It's not in our interest. And we also have to be careful how we use the weapon of sanctions. Sanctions is a blunt instrument which often has the innocent and the unintended targets. Often, sometimes to change the behavior of one individual, we squeeze a whole nation. And it doesn't affect the leadership that we are getting at. And in fact, we even give them an excuse. They will tell their people, it's not us, it's the UN, it's the West. Consider your life before the sanctions with what you have today. The other thing we need to worry about sanctions, eventually I hope some of you will do your thesis on it, is when you have the weapon of sanctions in your pocket and you are sitting across the table negotiating with someone else, do you have the patience to exhaust all possible avenues to find a solution? Or you're sometimes tempted to say, oh, this idiot doesn't know what's in my pocket. I can slap sanctions on him very quickly. He doesn't know what's coming. You know, and of course, once we've put it down, it's sometimes very difficult to lift it. In quite a few of the sanctions, I don't think those who imposed the sanctions expected it to last as long as it did, because we project. I mean, some who were at the table when Iraqi sanctions were imposed thought, give it 6 months to a year and it will be done, because we project. As Amartya Sen puts it, those who live in democracy do not starve. You starve them and you know what happens to you. You're on your way out of office. But if you don't live in a democracy and the leadership is not bothered, what happens? And if it goes on for years and the country is brought on its knees, who suffers? These are questions that you, as bright young minds, should explore. And when you do find some answers, I would be grateful if you will share it with me. On the question of UN or on Security Council reform, I think the reform of the Security Council, I've said enough about it, and I really believe that it is necessary. There has been the question of, can one encourage the permanent members not to use the veto in situations where populations are at great risk of genocide, grave humanitarian situation, and really prevent themselves from using it? I know France and other countries are working on this, but I, as chairman of the elders at the Munich conference in February, with Group Brundtland, we put forward a proposal also arguing that permanent members cannot just use their veto when attempts are being made to resolve a serious situation, because you cannot allow them to continue to put down a visa, freeze the situation without offering an alternative. So they should be challenged to say, I'm putting down my veto. I know it will block us from taking the action you propose, but as an alternative, I propose we do this and that to resolve the problem. They should be challenged to do that, and the people should demand that of them. And they are in the council, not in their individual national capacity or for the interest. That was not the original intent anyway. If you wish, they are sort of an executive committee of a global system, and they are there to think of our interest. I know sometimes it's forgotten, but we should remind them that our interests are also important. On the last question, UN-France relations, I must say during my time we had excellent relationship. I worked extremely well and closely with President Chirac on lots of issues. There are things that the UN did that we couldn't have done without the support of France. I'll give you two examples on the question of Ituri in Eastern Congo, where the peacekeeping operations got into such difficulty that it could have unraveled. And in discussions with him, I pleaded for him to work with us and the European Union to send a rapid reaction force to the region, and that they would stay for 3 months, not more, to give us time to stabilize the force and strengthen the force. And we managed to do that. But it was also important that the UN respected the deadline and that the force could withdraw after the 3 months deadline. We also worked I, as Secretary General, worked very closely with him on the Iraq invasion. Obviously, depending upon where you stood, we were on the wrong side or the right side. Thank you very much.